So in the last video, we were talking about the necessity of putting a limit on compassion. If you don't put a cap somewhere on compassion, if you don't set boundaries on it, it eventually becomes counterproductive and it weakens and enfeebles the very people that you're trying to help. It produces spoiled dependence. It produces whiny, whinging adult toddlers, people who haven't learned to fight and to struggle and be pragmatic in their circumstances, people who haven't learned to achieve in spite of what they've gone through, who haven't developed character and who basically can't function in the real world. When someone's a victim, in the first instance, of course it is best to offer them love and sympathy and compassion. That's absolutely the right response. But at some point, that compassion becomes counterproductive. And you need to tell them to quit whining, to quit wallowing in self-pity, to stand up again, to assume some agency in this world, to take some responsibility for where they're at and to make something of their lives in spite of what they've gone through, which can feel brutal to tell someone that, but it's genuinely how we maximize potential. And I also talked in the last episode about how it tends to be the men or the fathers who are the ones to put this necessary limit on compassion, because women are far more empathetic than men. So if a child falls over, the mother will tend to be the one who rushes in to comfort and to coddle and to offer sympathy. That's her natural instinct, and that's good. Whereas the father will tend to be the one who kind of tells the kid to brush it off. It'll be okay. Stand up. Come on. Stop crying. That's kind of like the fatherly response.
You done? Sound like you're still whining to me. You gonna listen in the store? You gonna stop whining? You gonna stop screaming? You gonna listen? Because everybody see you acting a fool. I'm not taking you back into Walmart until you stop with your mess. We're not going back in the store until you stop with your mess. If we go back in the store, you do it again, we're coming back out and sitting down. And I ain't moving until I want to move, and I don't have to move. We don't have to walk around the store with your mom. That's a privilege.
We also looked at the father in My Left Foot, who instead of pandering to his son's disability, kind of said, come on, struggle through it. Let's see what you can do in spite of this disability. And eventually it fostered an independent resilience in that kid. So dads do this, and this is good. Longtime followers of the Fuel Project will know that my brother had a lot of health issues when he was younger. He was a victim of some very serious health issues. Now, in response to that, my mum, as you would expect, took a lot of time off work to look after him in his early years. But eventually he reached an age where my dad saw this was becoming counterproductive. He was being coddled a bit too much. So he actually told my mum to go back to work. It was becoming counterproductive, this over-coddling. And so thereafter, my brother had to learn to function a bit more independently. And that was a good thing for him because he could. He did. He learned to function independently. I remember another time when I was playing tennis with my dad. I can't remember how old I was, but I was just beginning to get to this age where I thought I could start beating him in some things. I thought my speed and strength and skill was beginning to come up to a level where I could match him. So I challenged him and we started this tennis match, but I remember no matter how hard I tried and played in this match, I couldn't get a point off him, not even 1 point. And he wouldn't give me one either. He wouldn't go easy on me. I was getting thrashed in this match. And I remember getting so frustrated that tears began to come into my eyes because I was playing as hard as I could and I just could not beat him. I was getting so frustrated. And I kept expecting him to back down a little bit, to feel sorry for me, to be a bit compassionate on me, especially with tears in my eyes, and to, give me a few free points in this match. But he didn't. He absolutely destroyed me. And I remember taking that match as a reality check. I thought I was up here. I thought I was ready to match him. But in fact, I had a lot of learning and growing to do still. And I learned that nothing gets handed to you on a plate. If you want something, if you want to win in life, then nobody's going to hand that to you. You need to put the work in to get it. That was the lesson I learned on that court that day. And I did. It made me work 10 times harder. I started practicing. I worked on my speed and strength. I became more resilient. I became stronger. So that's what dads do. This is one of the blessings that dads bestow upon their children. I imagine that if my mum had been there and saw me teary-eyed I'm sure her heart would have broken and she would have told my dad to ease off a little bit, to let me have a few points or even to let me win. But I needed that lesson from my dad. It's tough to lose. It's painful. So put the work in, struggle through it, and make sure you never feel this way again. Learn how to win. It kind of reminds me of this scene from Rocky Balboa where things are not going well for his son. So he starts whining about it. He starts trying to blame other people. He starts trying to paint himself as a victim. But instead of pandering to that and coddling him, Rocky basically says, look, son, quit your whinging.
It's gonna end up bad for me.
You think I'm hurting you?
Yeah, in a way you are.
That's the last thing I ever wanted to do.
I know that's not what you want to do, but that's just the way that it is.
Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Now, if you know what you're worth, now go out and get what you're worth. But you gotta be willing to take the hits and not pointing fingers saying you ain't where you wanna be because of him or her or anybody. Cowards do that, and that ain't you.
So fathers tend to be the ones who bring this harder edge, this important harder edge. They limit compassion. They stop kids from wallowing in self-pity and throwing tantrums. And it's not for nothing that men have this natural instinct. It's not because they enjoy being brutish or harsh. It's because they instinctively understand that their kids are not going to make it in this world unless they learn these hard lessons. It's tough love. Therefore, as fathers are increasingly absent from families today and masculinity itself is increasingly derided as toxic, you know, if a father tells a kid to stop crying and be a bit more stoic, that's now considered toxic today. And what that means is compassion's no longer being limited by this male influence. A generation's growing up without learning these important fatherly hard lessons. And unlimited compassion in this feminist age is instead producing these weak, enfeebled, spoiled, dependent adult toddlers that we see all around us. So you see what I'm trying to get at here? We need more dads doing their thing because when they do, they bless their children, and it would solve a lot of the problems that we see around us today. Now, another thing I want us to notice is that the other things that should be limiting compassion are these values here, the hard virtues. Entrenched, the prequel to this series, we looked at how these value sets often clash, and when they do, these values should be setting a limit on these values. In other words, we should be compassionate up until the point that compassion contravenes truth, and then we stop. We should be compassionate up until the point it contravenes righteousness, and then we stop. And the same thing goes for justice and for reason as well. The hard virtues should set the framework or the outer boundaries within which we implement our compassion and love and kindness. And the problem with the postmodern age, as I laid out in Trench, is that we are no longer doing this. The Cultural Revolution in 1967 said, love is all you need. In a world where you can be anything, just be kind. Love will save the world. The future is female, etc., etc. These are the mantras that are now considered wisdom today. These are all we need. We can build a society on these values alone, and what a society it would be. And therefore, we can get rid of these ones. Get rid of them. They're binned. We don't need them. Boom. So, for example, a man puts on a dress, some makeup and lipstick, and says there's a million genders, and he calls himself a woman, whatever. What we should be saying is, look, we can sympathize with your gender dysphoria. You've got a mental delusion that's unaligned with reality. We can be compassionate towards that. We can try to help you back into reality. We can try to help you heal from that delusion. But the truth is, you're not a woman and you never can be. And therefore, we're not going to pander to your delusion. We're not going to reorder society around it. We're not going to let you into women's spaces or let you compete against women in sport, because the truth limits our compassion. The truth sets the boundaries within which we implement our compassion. See what I'm trying to get at here? Also, when someone says that they're experiencing homosexual attraction, again, we can be compassionate towards that and say, look, we sympathize that you're experiencing these unnatural desires. We can try to help you work through the reasons for that, get to the root of that. We can try to help you heal from that and get you back towards natural desires. But righteousness states it's a sin, it's unnatural, and it can never be anything else. So we're not going to pander to your homosexuality or affirm it or reorder society around it, because righteousness sets the boundaries Honor compassion. It sets the outer limits within which we operate with our compassion and love. When a person of a minority race experiences racism, we can be compassionate towards that. Of course we can. And we can sympathize, and we should work to build bridges between black and white. However, if you start rampaging around cities, looting and burning, and if you start shoplifting, then justice still says that you should get locked up for that. You're still going to jail. Justice sets the limits. Honor compassion. When someone says that 2 + 2 = 5, we can say, look, we're sympathetic towards your lack of education. You don't understand arithmetic. We can help you though. We can help to educate you, but we're not going to reorder society around that delusion because it's unreasonable. Reason sets the limit. It sets the outer boundaries. Honor compassion. So you see how this should work. The hard virtues are supposed to set the boundaries on the soft virtues. These set the framework upon which or within which we implement our compassion and kindness. But again, we're not doing any of this anymore. In the postmodern age of love is all you need, in a world where you can be anything, just be kind, etc., etc., the great idea is unfettered compassion. If compassion contravenes truth, then bin the truth. A man says he's a woman and there's a million different genders. We know that's not true, but let's just bin the truth. Just be compassionate. That's all we need. Unfettered compassion. Homosexuality contravenes righteousness, then bin righteousness. Unfettered compassion. People of a certain skin color are looting and shoplifting, then bin justice. Just be compassionate. Someone says that 2 + 2 = 5, then bin reason. Just be compassionate. You see what I'm getting at here? That's what wokeism is. That's the ethos of the postmodern age. The woke see their beliefs as a triumph of compassion, and in some senses it is, but in the process, it's an ideology without truth, without righteousness, without justice, and without reason. It's a philosophy that has none of these things in it. It's truthless, unrighteous, it's unjust, it's unreasonable, which is why it says untruthful things like men can be women, and there's a million genders, and it says unrighteous things like homosexuality should be normalized, and drag queens should get to do strip shows in front of kids, and pedophilia is normal. It says unjust things like people of a certain skin color should have carte blanche to do anything they want to break the law, no repercussions. And it says unreasonable things like 2 + 2 = 5. The decades of following a truthless, unrighteous, unjust, and unreasonable ideology is this. Approval for homosexuality is up. Divorce up. Euthanasia up. Abortion up. Casual sex up. Suicide up. Prostitution up. When we lived under Christian teaching, our society flourished. It prospered. It was healthy. It was happy. It was balanced. It was good. We loved it. Let's face it, we all loved it. But having abandoned the word of God and replaced it with the postmodern religion of intersectional theory, we've started moving towards an immoral hellscape, something like the days of Noah and the days of Lot as described in the Bible, just an immoral cesspit of decay and decline. And if we just came back to the Bible again, we could solve this. We could start reversing all these years of decay if we chose. If we started following the Bible's precepts again, it would tell us to give due respect to fathers and to the leadership role of men, and we get all the benefits of that I've just been describing. It would also tell us to hold all of these values in tension. The Bible would tell us that love is important. Yes, it is, but truth is important too. It would tell us to clothe ourselves in compassion, but also to pursue righteousness. It would tell us about the importance of grace, but also about the importance of justice. It would tell us to be merciful, but also to reason with one another. You can look all these verses up. As we spoke about in Trench, Christianity holds all these values in tension. And so finally, can I say, this is why allowing intersectionality into the church is a disaster. Intersectionality is a cancer on the church. A lot of people within the church today, liberal Christians, people who would call themselves progressive Christians, hear the woke talking about love and compassion and they think, that sounds like Christianity. Those are Christian words. Those are things I can get on board with. Let's go for it. So they adopt intersectional teaching, they bring it into the church, and so in with it comes feminism and homosexuality and transgenderism. Have you ever heard of these wasp larvae parasites that get inside spiders? I think it's maybe in Central America, I'm not sure. And once they get inside, they control the spider's brain. So the spider's effectively a kind of zombie spider. On the outside, it still looks like a spider. It still looks like it's moving under its own control, but it's actually being controlled by these parasites inside it. And then over time, the parasites actually hollow the spider out from the inside. until it eventually dies. It's a gruesome thing, but that's a bit like what intersectional theory does when it gets into the church. It still has the outward appearance of a church, at least for a while, but what's actually being preached on the inside is merely the postmodern religion of intersectional theory. And as it spreads, it kind of hollows out the church of its real teaching and purpose and direction until that church eventually dies, which is what's happening in a lot of mainstream churches right now. In the adoption of woke, you're exchanging the Bible for a truthless ideology, an unrighteous ideology, an unjust ideology, an unreasonable ideology. It's laying waste to society as we speak, and as it infiltrates the church, it's laying waste to churches as well. We as Christians need to separate out from this ideology immediately, come back to Jesus, come back to the Bible, and then start giving the pure word of God to the world, because outside of that, there is no other hope. That's the only hope we have, the Bible, God, what Jesus has done for us. Outside the cross of Christ, there is no other hope for this world. Intersectionality has caused this mess, this immoral decay. Only Jesus can fix it again.